we'll have question and answer at the end, and unless there's something really pressing during the presentation, try and let Al get through it first. And if you can use the Q&A function rather than the chat, that really helps us out in moderating. So, and we just have right now a share of our generous supporters and sponsors. Thanks, Dorothy, and thanks to all our sponsors. It's great. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that. Oh, we're getting close to 100 people. That's great. All right, well, without further ado, we'll get rolling and just introduce myself. Hi, everyone. John Pineau, Executive Director of the Ontario Woodlot Association and the Eastern Ontario Model Forest. Happy to be the technical moderator today and kind of the facilitator. Just want to thank Dorothy Hamilton with both organizations for her hard work and making all this happen. And just introduce Tony Bull, the president of the Eastern Ontario Model Forest and also a stalwart member of the OWA, to say a few words. Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I do wear two hats, and they both pretty comfortable. So with the Eastern Ontario Model Forest and also on the board of the Renfrew chapter of the OWA. And I've seen Al a few times in the bush talking to us and making us all wiser. Most recently at our woodlot with students from Algonquin College. And we were one of 5 OWA member woodlots that Algonquin College students visited, along with you, John, and Al, I think, in each case as well. And we're really happy to be part of their educational experience. And I should also, I will mention that we also provided a $1,000 bursary to a student at Algonquin College. And we're going to be doing that for the next 2 years at least, but I suspect it will become habit forming. So with that, I will pass it back to you.
Thanks, Tony. And just so you know, John and Helen Ann Stewart are dialed in or tuned in here. So great to see you both. Glad you got the Zoom to work. We're just over 100 folks and more coming in. I'll give Al a quick introduction. And again, I don't want to take too much time away from his presentation because he's going to really provide some excellent information and insights into the topic. Al's been a great friend, one of my best friends, I would say, in the top 3 of all equal best friends, 4 or 5 maybe. The forestry crew of the Ottawa Valley, the old boys network, we call ourselves, in a good positive way. We worked together at the Forestry Research Partnership. Al was actually instrumental in getting me back to Ontario all those years ago. Well, what can I say? I call him Mr. Eloquent. He not only has tremendous forestry knowledge and on the ground experience, he also communicates it brilliantly, and it comes from years of his work at the then Ministry of Natural Resources, nothing else. We won't get into the big long name, and work as a forest science specialist and our project manager at the Forestry Research Partnership. He's retired now for quite a few years, but still active with volunteer roles and just doing so much. He was the first Forest Tech president, I believe, of the Canadian Institute of Forestry. And that's quite something. It's after 100 years of presidents that were foresters, but Al was Forest Tech and probably one of the best presidents we ever had. So much good I can say about him. I'm a much better golfer though. There is a pond at the Mattawa course that's named in his honor, as he's put many balls into it. I can go on and on about that. Actually, the truth is we're pretty even at golf, but yeah, just so much good to say. You know, Al is in the provincial tree marking course. He volunteers work all the time in forestry and always, you know, getting good information out and helping to educate and train folks and bring the next generation into forestry in a positive way. One final anecdote, we together taught the land stewardship course at Algonquin College in the Forest Tech program. First time we did it together last year, and our friend, the program coordinator, Peter Arbor, said he was jealous because the students gave it the highest rating of any course ever that they took. So something for us to be proud of, Al. I think it was mostly you though, but it was a great treat for me to teach that course with you. So take it away, Al. I hope that's a good introduction for you and a good bio. So.
Well, thank you very much, John. That's very kind, and I want to thank the organizing committee for allowing me to have some time to do this presentation today. Dorothy and Tony and John and Martin Straight. And most importantly, folks, I want to thank all of you who've taken time out of your day to hear what we have to say today. So I really do appreciate the opportunity. And maybe, John, I'll share my screen and we'll get this presentation started.
You bet.
So I guess I'm at the point where I can share. And we'll make that happen. And we'll get it running. All right, are we seeing the screen?
The screen is up. You just have to go into the slideshow mode, I think. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, so we're all set to go.
Ready to go.
All right, folks, I've got a lot of material to cover. Some of you will have seen portions of this before, but as always, I'm adding something every time I do this presentation. Again, my thanks to the organizing committee for giving me the time to share this with you folks today. So let's get rolling. Here is what I would love to accomplish today, and let's hope we have time to get this done. I want to talk to you folks about the things in your forest, in your woodlot, that contribute to value in your forest. I'm going to describe what those keys are, how we can manage for value in your individual forests. And then lastly, I'm going to finish up with some data, some studies and empirical data that actually prove the point that it is worth the effort to try to manage for value. And my underlying theme is going to be, in order to do this, you need to engage professionals at every stage of management in your forest to make this happen. Okay, we're jumping right into this. These are the things that influence the value of your forest, of your woodlot. The wood quality, so whether it's pulp or biomass or veneer, the size of that wood really matters. Large wood is worth more than small wood. The volume per hectare, so how many cubic meters per hectare, have a huge impact on the value of your woodlot. And the species that are present, red oak often worth more than poplar. Those four first things that have the check mark here are things that we can influence, that you can influence. You have control over those through the professionals that you hire to manage your forest. The bottom three, the distance to the mill, huge impact on the value, but we have no control over that. The terrain and site conditions, we inherit those. We're not going to be changing those. And generally, road access is something that we're not going to have a big influence on, especially in Southern Ontario. So these are kind of the big 7 here, and 4 of those 7 we control. Now, why all this focus on value? And I'm going to be quick. There's a lot of items here, but basically we have slow growing forests in this part of the world. Our hardwood forests grow at about half a cubic meter per hectare per year, and our conifer forests at best grow at about 10 cubic meters per hectare per year. We're not going to compete with eucalyptus or loblolly pine or yellow pine. We're not competing with Brazil or the southern US or New Zealand. So we're not going to win the volume game. We are going to win the value game. What we have over all of those other locations is a huge range of value products available from our forests. And these values that I'm listing here, folks, are the value, generally today's value that you would get mill gate for those various products. So when that product is delivered to the gate of the mill, this is what you'll get paid. So look at this, biomass, only $35 per ton. Pulp, $50 per ton. Saw logs, 90, poles, 150, and veneer, 300. That is huge. And you and the practices that you do in your forest have a huge influence on which one of these values you'll be extracting now and in the future. And having a trained silvicultural tree marker make those decisions on what trees come out and what stays will have a big influence on this. So these are all a lot of factors that we can actually have some control over. Why the focus on piece size? Why does size matter in forestry? And it matters because of two things. Because it reduces logging costs and it improves lumber recovery. So let's look at it from the perspective of the logger. And these are based on studies done by FP Innovations. If you have an average 12-centimeter log and you move that to 15 centimeters, so if you can grow it or your practices can improve the average diameter of your woodlot from 12 to 15, you're going to reduce the logging cost by 16 to 19%. But look at that same 12-centimeter tree going to a 25-centimeter average, you're reducing logging costs by 50%. Why does that matter to you, the landowner? Well, the logger is going to pay you more money if his logging or her logging costs are reduced. So it's important. Size matters to the logger. Now let's look at the lumber mill, where all of this wood or material is going. Again, our same 12-centimeter tree, move that average to 15, you improve lumber recovery by 45%. But wow, take that same 12-centimeter tree, move the average to 25, you increase lumber recovery by 290%. Why does that matter to you, the landowner? Because the sawmill is going to pay a lot more for large trees than small trees because they can recover a lot more lumber. That's why size matters. Here are the keys to maximizing value in your woodlot. It's almost the timing. I'll call this kind of the Goldilocks syndrome here. You want to thin, not too soon and not too late. And if you're on either side of these, it can have a detrimental effect on all of those factors that influence value. The prescription is the key. So make sure that you use an RPF recommended by the Ontario Woodlot Association. That prescription is so important. You do not want to overcut and you do not want to undercut. So timing matters, the amount harvested matters, the prescription matters. Use your local OWA chapter to source reputable registered professional foresters. And again, tree marking. So once you have decided the right time to harvest, got the right prescription, you have to have the right trees removed if you want to add value to your forest, if you want to influence those 4 factors that matter. Using a certified tree marker, and again, recommended by the OWA, is the way to go. And you will steer yourself free of a lot of trouble, and you'll have that positive influence that you need to have. And lastly, and also very important, is the harvest operation. You need to have a reputable contractor. You need to closely control that harvest. You need to shop around, and again, use the resources of the Ontario Woodlot Association to source a reputable harvest contractor. So I'm going to talk about 3 silvicultural treatments that a trained silvicultural tree marker will implement on a forest. So if you have a predominantly hardwood dominated forest, a tolerant hardwood dominated forest, they're going to be doing something called single tree selection. And here are the 4 points that they're really going to try to accomplish. They're going to improve the quality of your forest. They're going to retain somewhere between 18 and 20 square meters of residual basal area in this part of the world. It'll be more in southwestern Ontario. They're going to work to that uneven age forest structure, and they're generally not going to remove 1/3 of the basal area. So this is what a trained silvicultural tree marker will do in your forest to accomplish those 4 goals that I talked about. This is what it should look like after harvest. So this is one of the silvicultural systems that a trained silvicultural tree marker is trained and tested and certified to implement. What's next? Let's say you have a conifer dominated forest, let's say a mature white pine forest or white pine, red pine mixed forest or hemlock forest. The things they're going to accomplish will be thin from below, always improve the quality. If you don't leave the forest in better shape than when you started, there's no sense in doing any harvest operation, in my mind. And they will have a clear objective, and it will either be a prep cut, a regen cut, a first removal, or a final removal. And these are some metrics that kind of demonstrate their target residual basal areas. The key is not to over harvest. Again, a trained silvicultural tree marker will implement this prescription, this type of harvest, if you have a conifer dominated forest. And the third type of forest, and oh, by the way, this is what it's going to look like after. And I want to thank John and Helen Ann Stewart for these pictures. So this is a picture of their forest post-harvest. The picture on the left shows the ideal crown spacing, and the picture on the right shows the thinning from below, leaving the biggest and the best to regenerate the next forest and continue to grow. So that's what your forest will look like if you do uniform shelter wood. The third condition that a trained silvicultural tree marker is going to encounter and implement is plantation thinning. Many of you will have red pine, white spruce, or white pine forests that have been planted. Again, timing is critical in these forests. Their first thinning is going to be a row thinning, and please, please, please minimize those rows. Ideally, we will have no more than 1 in 4 removed. And at LaRose Forest, they're doing 1 in 6. The equipment today allows you to minimize those intrusive rows to gain access for your equipment and allow you to thin from below in those adjoining rows. I see way too many 1 in 3 rows being removed, and that's not ideal. We have equipment that can do better than that right now. Again, they're going to thin from below. They're going to improve the quality of your forest. They're not going to take more than 1/3 of the basal area. And some studies that we've been involved in fact, the longest standing spacing and thinning trial in Canada, started by Will Steele. When we did the 3rd harvest, the ideal residual basal area from the analysis of that study is about 32 square meters per hectare in a red pine plantation. Again, a trained silvicultural tree marker will allow you to get there. And if you do all of those things right, and you have a nice site, this is a stand of one of the oldest red pine plantations in Ontario. It's now 100 years old. It's at LaRose Forest. It has been thinned 6 or 7 times, but lightly, always thin from below. The last harvest that occurred 10 years ago, 20 hectares, took 1/3 of the basal area, $400,000 of value was gained from that harvest. And guess what? It's ready for another one right now, 10 years later. And again, the crowns are looking great on this. The live crown ratio is fine. There is no need to kind of end this thinning regime in this particular forest, in this particular site. That's the kind of thing that can be accomplished by trained silvicultural tree markers. So implementation, how do we pull this all together? First of all, we want to do a pre-harvest data collection effort specific to your particular stand. You want a harvest prescription that is prepared specific to your forest, silvicultural tree marking by trained certified staff, audit that tree marking, and careful logging. And these are the 5 steps that one needs to follow to maximize value in your forest. So implementation of the prescription, how do we do this? Use the OWIA to source a reputable prescription writer. Not all RPFs are created equally. Not all tree markers are created equally. You want to get the very best working on your forest. And the way you do that is you use your local chapter to source people that are reputable. You want to make sure that prescription is based on data that's been collected in the field, and they should be tailored to your objectives. So sit down with that prescription writer and say, look, I'm really interested in maintaining wildlife values for a particular species. I have a heritage value I want protected, those kinds of things. Your prescription should be tailored to your needs as long as it's sustainable. How do we implement the tree marking? Again, OWIA to source a certified tree marker. Make sure that that person doing the tree marking is certified. That program is a very intense training program. It is one of the most intense in North America. In fact, I've heard it referred to by the World Wildlife Fund people who actually attended it as the best silvicultural training course that they have been identified to them in the world, which is crazy stuff. But It's a thorough course, is my point. There's very rigorous training, rigorous standards, rigorous testing, and you want to make sure that the person making the decisions about who lives and dies in your forest has this certification. By the way, this program is now delivered by in a partnership with the OWA, the CIF and Forest Ontario. Moving on, implementation, harvesting. Use the Ontario Woodlot Association to harvest or source your harvesting contractor. Always seek 2 bids. And use the OWA, the Ontario Woodlot Association, to develop a harvest contract with your harvest provider. Here is the key: inspect early. So the day that harvesting begins, you get out there and you make sure that harvester is doing exactly what is planned, because that's the time to make sure any misunderstandings are corrected before too much water goes under the bridge and the damage is done. And then periodically inspect. But the key is be there initially when things are getting started. A very quick definition here: AGS and UGS. Think of AGS as the good trees, the trees you want in the forest, the trees that have high value, that are not at risk of dying. UGS are trees that are displaying exterior defect indicators, are low value trees, and they are at risk of dying. So I'm at the portion of this presentation where we're going to start looking at some studies that kind of demonstrate the value of sustainable management, of hiring the right people to do the work in your forest. This is a study called the ARG study, the Algonquin Region Growth and Information Study. Based on thousands of observations, this next series of slides shows the kind of improvement that we can do in our forests if we hire trained silvicultural tree markers and prescription writers. So the forest condition generally in these thousands of plots prior to harvest, prior to any intervention in a sustainable way, had 70% poor quality material, 30% good quality material. After one tree marking, after one intervention, we switched that balance. We added 13% to the good quality material by having the trained silvicultural tree markers improve the value or the quality of that forest by selecting low quality trees to be cut and retaining high quality trees. We can't do it all at once because we also have to maintain enough trees in our forest as well, but we got improvement. After the second entry, we were at 62% acceptable growing stock and 38% unacceptable growing stock. So employing trained silvicultural tree markers can get this kind of improvement in the forests of central and Ontario, southern Ontario. Okay, so why do we care about acceptable growing stock and unacceptable growing stock? Well, acceptable growing stock grows faster. Again, this is a study based on thousands of observations, and if you look at these 2 lines here, the line at the top is the growth rate for acceptable growing stock, the line at the bottom for unacceptable growing stock. So we clearly have more growth when we have higher quality trees. So that's one of the reasons we want to retain those trees and improve their percentage. But AGS also has more value. So not only does it grow faster, it actually has more value. Again, based on empirical studies, we did a study in an area called the Stokes plot, and we cut a whole lot of AGS trees and UGS trees, dissected those trees, looked at the mill value, the lumber recovery, and UGS trees were worth $160 a cubic meter, AGS trees $213 a cubic meter. So AGS grows faster and it is higher value. All right, why all this concern about not damaging trees as well? So you can do the best prescription and the best tree marking ever possible, but if you don't have a good logging contractor in there and you damage some of your residual trees, it's all for naught. And again, this is part of the Stokes study, and what we need to focus on is undamaged trees, on average, medium saw logs, $323 a cubic meter, damaged trees 193. And this was 20 years after that damage had occurred. So it was a study area where damaged and undamaged trees had been identified 20 years ago. We cut some of those trees, did the lumber recovery in a very detailed study, and this was the difference that was shown. And I want to thank Murray Woods for a lot of this data that that I've just been presenting. Murray Woods was instrumental in doing these studies, and credit goes to him.
Excuse me, Al, could I just ask a question quickly? There were a couple folks that just wanted a little bit more of an explanation on thin from below.
Okay, thinning from below means that you remove the smaller trees and retain larger trees. So typically, you're trying to retain that high overhead story, that high canopy, and you're removing smaller trees that are of lower diameter. And if you think back to that picture that I showed of John and Helen Ann's uniform shelterwood stand, that was thinning from below because all of the large, healthy, big trees were retained. And the smaller trees that were white pine that were actually the same age as those larger trees were removed. So thinning from below means keeping high overhead shade, keeping larger diameter trees, and removing some of those smaller diameter trees, especially in an even age scenario where they're all the same age. And these are just kind of the runts of the litter, for lack of a better word. Does that cover it, John?
Oh, that's perfect. Thanks, Al.
Okay. Next study, and again, Murray Woods did this. It was based on 120 plots placed all across central Ontario, and they were established before harvest, and all of the trees were measured. And then these were blind plots. Then they were harvested. We reestablished those plots to see how much was damaged. And what we found in that study was we improved the good quality trees by 13% through marking. That's a great thing. But here is the bad news. Logging damage knocked that down to only a 7% improvement. So we lost 6% of that potential improvement because of logging damage. So it just reiterates the importance of making sure that if you want to add value to your woodlot, you do careful logging and you minimize logging damage. Here we go into the longest standing single tree selection study in Canada. And that's a study that's in Algonquin Park. It's called the Parkside Gully study. It was initiated in 1965, and it has been harvested 4 times since then on a single tree selection scenario. So we're now getting into a very detailed study. It is a jewel of all of the studies on single tree selection in Canada, and I better get rolling. It's a very, very detailed study. Each time we have harvested this over the years, we've measured the trees standing in the forest. We measure them when they're cut in the forest. We measure them when they're delivered to the mill, and we measure them when we recover the lumber value at the sawmill. So a very, very detailed hardwood study looking at the entire value chain from the forest to the sawmill. This is some theory right here. So if we look at the yellow triangles, that is the ideal residual diameter distribution in a single tree selection hardwood forest, this frequency distribution. So on the y-axis, I've got numbers of trees. On the x-axis, I've got diameter. What this basically demonstrates is in the perfect world, in theory, we would love to have the forest look like this yellow triangle line here, because that's what we observe in nature. And it really just means we want a lot of small trees, fewer medium size, and smaller large trees. The white box here, the line with the white box, that's what Parkside Gully looked like prior to the 4 harvests that were done back. So back in 1967, this is what it looked like. After harvest number 4, the green circle, that line shows you what it looked like. So we're getting pretty close. We're approximating that ideal diameter distribution, and those 4 single tree selection interventions have allowed us to get closer. You don't get there overnight, but bit by bit, we aim for this target. This is the theory of single tree selection. You can cut it down to 20 square meters of basal area. It grows for 20 years to 30, boom, we can cut it. And we do this forever. So this is the theory on which single tree selection is based. Well, what actually happened at Parkside Gully after 4 interventions? We're not looking too bad. We're getting pretty close to what the theory, the textbook kind of indicates that we're able to do. So we harvested in 67, it grew back, harvested, grew back, harvested, grew back, harvested. And it's due for a harvest again, and we hope to get this going in Algonquin Park very soon. This whole ingrowth one, I just want to point out one quick item here. We go to the far right and look at net growth. So the harvested area from 1992 to 2005 had a net growth of 0.38 square meters of BA. That's good. That's a positive thing. It's growing. Look at the unharvested control, where we never ever harvested. Death is exceeding growth. Mortality is exceeding growth. That means this forest that is unharvested has become a carbon emitter. It's the source of carbon, whereas the harvested forest is actually sequestering carbon. It's still taking carbon out of the air. I don't want you to lose that point, that sustainable management does not preclude good environmental management. In fact, sometimes it helps us along that path. Okay, logging damage. I'm going to move through this really quickly. What I want to show you here is that we did really careful logging in Parkside Gully. Our damage to residual was very, very low. We're in the 98% undamaged range, okay? That's pretty darn good. The requirements for the province are 90% of AGS and 85%. So we exceeded provincial standards. That's the point. Careful logging is the key. Going to fly right by this one. You can reference this later. Suffice to say, between harvested and unharvested, there are some differences, and those differences are in standing snags and down wood. My point being that we can't just chase good silviculture. We do need to do good silviculture, but we also need to pay attention to the wildlife attributes that we target when we're doing sustainable harvesting. So we need to make sure we're retaining 10 cavity trees per hectare. We need to make sure we're retaining 10 solitary conifer per hectare. If we lose sight of that and just go after our silvicultural objectives, ignoring wildlife objectives, we can be in danger of losing some of those important elements in the forest. And fortunately, a trained silvicultural tree marker will make sure that we balance silviculture and wildlife attributes. A lot of their training is focused on maintaining wildlife attributes in the forest. Here is something that I really want to point out. What we did in the Parkside Gully study is we compared to the base case the hardwood forest in Algonquin Park, which is very well managed. It's generally had about 2 single tree selection interventions. So it's a really good base case to be comparing to. It's better than the average crown land in Ontario. And so when they harvested in Algonquin Park, they produced 40% saw logs, 60% pulp. That's better than, for example, you'll find in the forest around North Bay, where I live. It probably is closer to 30% hardwood logs or 20% hardwood logs. So that's a very good base case in Algonquin Park. Look what happened in Parkside Gully on my next slide, where we've done 4 single tree selections. Wow, 75% hardwood saw logs, 25% pulp. So we've been able to move that to a much higher percentage of hardwood saw log by good silvicultural tree marking, good interventions for harvest interventions. All right, let's look at the bottom line here now, and we're going to look at it from the perspective of the forest manager. And so this is what our base case scenario. So the wood cut in Algonquin Park on every hectare yielded the forest manager net revenue of $636. So that's pretty good. And remember, that was 40% saw log. But look at Parkside Gully, same forest estate, Algonquin Park, $1,566 per hectare. That's huge. That's a huge difference. You're only going to see this kind of improvement if you hire trained, competent people to make the decisions in your forest about who lives and who dies. All right, let's look at it from the mill owner perspective. So this was, at the time, it was Tembec owned the mill in Huntsville, and Gerald Crows was kind enough to shut down the mill and do a little bit of a comparative study for us. So he ran through saw logs. So this is a saw log to saw log comparison. Saw logs from Algonquin Park, bush run, yielded $77 per ton net profit. Saw logs from Parkside Gully, so again, saw log to saw log, yielded $95 per ton net profit. Almost $20 per ton more net profit to the sawmill. Saw log to saw log. That's incredible, because they run hundreds of thousands of tons of saw logs through that mill each year. That's huge. I want to quickly introduce a new slide here, and I want to thank Paul Robertson for sharing some data on this one. So I'm going to call this the Robertson case study. So this is based on 6 plots, 6 permanent plots that have been remeasured 3 times after 3 harvests. And this is based on a forest that is 23.4 hectares in southwest Ontario. So in 1985, the basal area was 24. We had 75% saw logs before harvest. They took it down to 18, and we had, 78% AGS after harvest. Bottom line, that harvest generated $8,500 to the landowner total on this whole area. 1998, basal area grew back to 28%. We had 80% AGS. When they cut it, they took it down to 22, and that's a lot better residual basal area. I'm a lot happier seeing a BA like that in southwestern Ontario than 18. Again, a nice improvement in the AGS. They generated $28,900 for the landowner when you look at saw log and fuel wood volumes. 2021, just recently, the BA grew back to 28.4. That's wonderful. They knocked it down to 22.7. That's wonderful. You might wonder, well, why didn't they improve the AGS? Once you get to 90%, and if you want to maintain those wildlife attributes of cavity nesting trees and future snags, you're going to be hard pressed to get above 90% AGS. So I'm not concerned that I don't see this going up. And look at the revenue now generated. $131,500 generated on 24.3 hectares. And look, they've got a beautiful residual BA of 22.7. They can come back here in 10 years and do another harvest. And I hazard to guess it's going to be worth a lot more than the current one that took place. So another empirical piece of data that demonstrates the value of trained silvicultural tree markers making that decision. Someone can come in and high grade that forest and give you a lot of money right away, but there is no way you're going to build value in the future if you allow that to happen. This is what it looks like post-harvest. This is the range of diameters I want to see in single tree selection. I want to see large trees and small trees. I want to see that range of diameter distributions that we talked about in Parkside Gully. And I don't know how I'm doing here, John. I'm going to get through this, but apologies if I'm a bit long here. All right.
I know, no problem.
We're going to switch gears. We've looked at a number of case studies in tolerant hardwood. I want to talk about conifer right now. And again, we have such a wealth of data in Ontario that we should be very proud of, and we need to market a little better than we're doing right now. So at the Petawawa Research Forest, we have PSP1 and PSP2. These are the first permanent sample plots ever established in Canada, and they were established in 1918. And they were established in forest conditions that are now 144 years old. So these stands are in a white pine dominated forest that are now 144 years old. Now, the purpose of these 2 permanent sample plots when they were established in 1918 was, in one, to do numerous thinnings. So do what were deemed sustainable harvest interventions through time and track all of the metrics from that. Permanent sample plot 2, exact same forest condition, never thinned. So the purpose was to track that forest condition and see what happened through time. And fortunately, we have lots of data that has been collected through all of the research efforts at the Petawawa Research Forest. So we're going to explore these two scenarios and talk about them. So here's PSP1. Again, established in 1918. It's been harvested 7 times. And here is the quick detail on the 7 thinnings. So 1918, I would call these pre-commercial thinnings or prep cuts that took place, and how much basal area was removed and the volume that was removed in each one of these. Very light thinnings, very light thinnings. Then someone in 1941 did a regeneration cut effort. So they took out more basal area, more volume. But then later on, they deemed, okay, let's see if we can grow this overstory even a little longer. So another light thinning, I would call this a prep cut, and another light thinning, I would call this a prep cut, and the volumes removed, and then a salvage harvest. And then 2015, we said, okay, it's time to start regeneration in here. These seeds from these trees are not going to be viable for much longer. Let's do a regeneration cut, heavier harvest, and the volume that was removed. So let's look at some summary details, some summary data from these two sample plots. Total volume harvested in PSP1, this is the one that's been harvested 7 times in 102 years, is 445 cubic meters. Now this volume, by the way, has gone into products. So it has made white pine furniture, white pine cabinets, all kinds of different things. So it's probably still sequestering carbon in those products that were derived from those various harvests. Standing on the ground right now, we have 355 cubic meters of volume. Even today, after those 7 harvests, that's how much is still standing there. So the harvested and the volume standing equals 800 cubic meters have been produced or currently standing there. After the 2015 harvest, we did some site prep, and we had a study that measured the downed wood that is present on the forest floor. And that's an important element of sustainability, habitat for redback voles, salamanders, all kinds of things like that. And that's 23. And by the way, over those 102 years, we have had 50 cubic meters that have died standing. So in between harvests, there's been that volume die. More metric for PSP1. This is the area that's been harvested a number of times. Current existing basal area, 24 square meters per hectare. We have 40 centimeters that was reached in 1970. So the average diameter of this stand way back in 1970 was 40 centimeters. The unharvested area took another 50 years to reach an average diameter of 40 centimeters. So all of these interventions obviously had a huge impact on the average diameter of the wood. Currently today, we have 2 cohorts of diameter. We have that regen that happened from that regen cut that was done in the 1940s. And that's between 5 and 15 centimeters in diameter. And look at the diameter of the overstory, between 55 and 75 centimeters diameter. Huge. This is like a cathedral forest in there. We have 190 trees per hectare, and 81% of them are acceptable growing stock. This forest is still actively growing at 5 cubic meters per hectare per year. This is a carbon sink. It's still taking carbon out of the air. And this forest has been generally stable at this annual growth for about the last 40 years. So that's PSP1. Now let's look at PSP2. Remember, this is the forest that has never been harvested for 144 years and measured since 1918. Its current standing volume is 604 cubic meters per hectare, so more than in PSP 1. And we've had a lot of mortality. We've had almost 400 cubic meters, well over 400 cubic meters of mortality. So the standing plus mortality is 1,024 cubic meters. Our current basal area is huge at 45, but look at the average diameter. It's really, really small. Remember, the overstory in the other stand was between 55 and 75. This one is 40 centimeters, and there is no cohort of regeneration. So there's just that one cohort in the overstory with that range. We have a lot more stems per hectare, and the AGS is only 62%. Look at all the downed wood. Remember, we had 23 cubic meters per hectare, 183. This is all wood that is rotting and emitting carbon. And this volume of 400 and some cubic meters that died has rotted and emitted carbon. And most of it has vanished into thin air because there's only 183 of it still on the ground. So my point is some very drastically different forest conditions, a lot more stems per hectare, lower quality, a lot smaller diameter, higher basal area, and a lot more wood rotting and a lot more wood unaccounted for that has vanished into thin air through rot. A bit more. So it is declining. So PSP2 has a negative growth rate now of 3 cubic meters per hectare per year. So this has become a carbon source, and it started doing that about 23 years ago. So at around age 20, it started to become a carbon source. Let's do a bit of a quick comparison financials. Today's money, basically looking, at a very tertiary financial analysis. It's not net present value. It would be even more powerful if I did that kind of analysis. But let's look at PSP1. Again, 144 years old, harvested 7 times. The average tree volume is 5.3 cubic meters per hectare. That's massive. That is huge. The average tree volume in the area never harvested is 1.6 cubic meters per hectare. If you look at, in today's numbers, the value of the wood that was harvested in PSP1 and the value of the wood that is currently standing, to the landowner, it would represent about $55,800 per hectare. If you did the same kind of analysis in PSP2, and of course, you can only value the wood that is currently standing because the other has all died and gone, you would be at a value of about $40,000 per hectare. So that's kind of a bit of a tertiary financial analysis of those two scenarios. So we're down to summary, and I think we'll have some time for questions, but the approach that you choose on your land has a massive influence on the value and volume recovery now and in the future. So the decisions you make, many of them you have control over. To do it properly, in my mind, you need to rely heavily on highly trained, certified silvicultural tree markers. They're deciding the future of your forest. They're deciding which tree lives and which tree dies. Tree marking is one of the cheapest silvicultural treatments you will ever pay for, between $70 and $80 per hectare. Tree planting in the boreal forest, if you count site prep, is in the range of $2,000 to $3,000 per hectare sometimes. So it's a very, very cheap silvicultural operation. Careful logging is critical. You can do all of the right things from a prescription, tree marking perspective. You need to make sure that final piece is delivered. Everyone needs to work as a team. Everyone needs to work together. And you can, if you don't do that final step properly, all is for naught. The long-term approach is supported by empirical studies. We have lots of studies, we have lots of data, Ontario-centric data that proves this approach works in the long term. Yeah, you can make money right off the bat and high grade your forest, and it will be ruined for future generations. And that choice is yours, basically. But there's a lot of long-term financial benefit to making those right choices. I can't stress enough, use the Ontario Woodlot Association to source competent people working in your forest. Yes, everyone, you know, has some level of certification. Not all people are the same, basically, is my point. And you know that you're going to be dealing with competent people if they're recommended by your local OWA chapter. That's all I had, John. I think we have some time for questions.
Oh, we do indeed, Al. Thanks for a great presentation. I had several participants in the chat saying, please don't stop Al or cut short the presentation. It's good stuff. So I think you resonated well with folks. So yeah, we got a number of questions here in the Q&A. So I'm just gonna get into those right away. I'll read them to you and you can answer them, Al. It's great.
Sure.
First question from an anonymous attendee. Yeah, I don't read much. Why are poles more valuable than saw logs per ton? I'm new to forestry. Do poles mean telephone poles size?
Absolutely. So it's telephone poles, those big, large telephone poles that you see along the highway are your highest value product, especially in your red pine plantation. So that's really the end game. Do everything you can to get there. And if you over thin early, you're prejudicing your ability to produce those high value products later on. So it's thin lightly, thin often, not too much, not too little. It's the Goldilocks scenario. But yes, telephone poles is what I was referring to, and apologies for not making that clear.
No problem there. And then there are just a couple of questions about explaining thin from below. I think you already did that great. And I think everyone understands that. That's good. And then
and thin from below is especially pertinent in uniform shelterwood and single tree selection. So these are generally even age stands. So think of it, all of those stands of that whole range of diameters, all of those trees are the same age. And so thinning from below is actually taking out the trees that are phenotypically inferior. They're an inferior product of genetics and environment, and allowing those ones that you know often represent, well, they do represent a superior phenotype to reproduce and grow.
Right on. Thanks, Al. From Robert, is there an OWA standard contract available to use? Thank you. Yes, I can share that, Robert. We got a nice template that we've developed as part of our community forest owner cooperative pilots, and I think you can adapt that and use that. So I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. Well, maybe I should quickly write that down so that I actually follow through. And then I'll get back to your questions, Al. Here, there's lots of them.
Yeah, and I just saw Fraser's bullet there that tree marking on private land will generally be more expensive. Absolutely. The number that I quoted is on Crown land where there is no tallying happening, no volume estimate associated with that tree marking. So that's a really good point, Fraser. That's a low ball estimate. That's a Crown land estimate where you're paying for that person just to make that tree marking decision and not to produce a volume estimate based on the products that are available. Thanks, Fraser, for pointing that out. I hope I cleared it up.
Right on. Yeah, still a great investment, as Fraser says too. Eh? Yeah. Anonymous attendee, we have about 10 acres of mature white pine that have been thinned over the last 100 years and are now probably 75% maple hardwood. About 200 white pine that remain are very mature. Is it advisable to take out the remaining white pine to continue the transition to hardwood?
Well, I mean, that's a question that really can be answered only by visiting that stand. And that's why I want to stress that all prescription should be based on data collected specific to the stand. Generally speaking, what I think you're describing here has been maybe some failed attempts to regenerate white pine, if that was indeed the landowner objective, or if it was to transition to a tolerant hardwood forest, then mission accomplished. But I've seen a few over the years where, yeah, it's a nice white pine site, and there was an opportunity at one time to maintain that white pine in the regeneration, But if all of the things are not done correctly in terms of site preparation, competition control, and tree marking, they will transition to tolerant hardwood forests. And if it's a high quality tolerant hardwood forest and it's getting well established, it's there for keeps. But don't undervalue those pine in your forest. I mean, we should always maintain 10 solitary conifer as a minimum in a hardwood forest if we have that option. So we want to keep them as components of your forest. But that's a general answer, not really knowing the forest and not being able to see it.
Thanks, Al. Here's one from Robert again. Are there any suggestions for maintaining seasonal access to woodlots? That is, a woodlot that runs off a laneway with seasonal access.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So ideas for maintaining seasonal access. I guess I'd have to see the condition. John, can you help me clear that up for me? I'm not quite.
Yeah, I think maybe the context needs to be explained more. Maybe I can put Robert in touch with you, or we can talk to him more directly offline and get a little more information.
Yeah, if it's like a winter access issue, is that what we're describing? Or because it's too wet? Is it seasonal because of that? Is it seasonal because of public restrictions? I'm not quite sure why it is being classed as seasonal access.
Yeah, so I'll send Robert an email and I'll get a dialogue going, and we can take care of that. That could take quite a bit of discussion time.
Yeah.
So we'll just stick to more specific focus questions. I wonder why Parkside Gully yields so much better results than AFA, which should also be using GFP and RPF and certified tree markers.
Well, the reason is because Parkside Gully has had 2 more opportunities to utilize all those tools that you're referring to. So they've done a heck of a good job in the park through AFA, but they've only had 2 interventions to make that improvement, that quality improvement, whereas Parkside Gully has had 4 interventions to make that quality improvement. And by the way, to get 40% saw log is a good thing on many of the Crown land scenarios, because we've only had 1 opportunity to improve. As I mentioned, here in the Nipissing Forest, where I am on Crown land, it's often 20% saw log return is the number that they're looking at. So they're doing a good thing, but they just haven't had the time to do 4 interventions in Algonquin Park, because we didn't start doing good silvicultural tree marking until the late 70s. I'll be very honest with you, mid to late 70s. And up until then, we really, things weren't done the way that they could have been done. But we've learned, and I hope that 20 years from now, people are saying the same thing, that there's some nuances to the things that we're doing now that can be improved, because I've seen that in my career from 1976 to now. I've seen a lot of change and positive change in the decisions that are made in the forest, even at the individual tree level.
Well, good point, Al. What's this from John? What is the price paid per ton in 1985 as compared to, say, 2021? Just curious.
Yeah, wow. I can't remember exactly, to be quite honest with you. There is an improvement, no doubt about it. But what is disturbing to me, and this inflation that we're seeing on lumber for you and I, the person buying it at the lumber store, has not been passed on to the people in the forest. So the people that are harvesting the trees and delivering it have not seen that same kind of increase in value that we as people buying at retail stores are seeing. I can tell you that has not kept pace. But to give you an exact number, I'd just be guessing, and it probably would be irrelevant.
Yeah, thanks, Al. When you quote dollar value returns and harvests over time, are the dollar values corrected to a base year?
On the white pine scenario, I'm correcting those to current values. In the hardwood scenario, for the Robertson case study, those were numbers at that time. So 85, that's what was collected in $85. The Parkside Gully is corrected to the year in which that study was done.
Right on. And from John, can the tree marker influence the amount of damage caused by the contractor?
To a degree. I mean, if they need to keep in mind, they can't ask the contractor to do impossible things with the choices that they're making. So they can certainly have an influence on that. The trouble that the tree marker has is sometimes you don't know what type of equipment is going to be coming in. Is it a cut and skid gang? Is it a feller buncher? Is it horse logging? You don't necessarily know where that logging contractor is going to put their skid trails. You don't necessarily know the skill level of the logger who will be doing the logging. So you can have a little bit of influence, but really the silvicultural tree marker has to predominantly think of the silvicultural and wildlife objectives that they're meant to implement, and leave it to the logging contractor to make their decisions based on what trees have been identified for removal. So to a small degree, but I don't want to overstate their influence. I think the biggest thing is the skill and equipment used by the logger. That has the biggest influence, and the time and care that is taken.
Yeah. Well, right on. I remember all those logging damage studies we did at the FRP, the Forestry Research Partnership.
Yeah.
Very much formed what you just said there. Just from an anonymous attendee, when purchasing treed land with the intention of harvesting sustainably for income, what is the minimum size that you would recommend? I guess minimum size of the trees.
Boy, minimum size of the trees, bigger is better.
Yeah.
You certainly don't want to be buying a bunch of early growth material, early successional growth material. You saw the influence, like it's got to be 25 centimeters DBH plus to have a whole lot of commercial value, and ideally you're in the range of 40 centimeters average diameter. So somewhere in that range. Anything smaller than that, you're probably not looking at a lot of current value, because biomass, even if it needed a thinning and you could do some kind of a pre-commercial thinning, biomass is very low value, and it's even hard to market it now. We need more markets for biomass. We need to do more green energy. We have such an excess of supply, and we need to be able to pull low quality material out of our forests to improve them. If they're talking about area, well, it depends on how much revenue you want to generate.
Yeah.
1 hectare can generate revenue, and the more hectares, the more revenue.
Yeah, I'm glad you answered that, Al, just in case I was misinterpreting the question. Thanks. Yeah. All right. Good. From John, what is recommended timing between harvest? Woodlot is hardwood in southwestern Ontario.
Okay, you can the interval. So if you're doing single tree selection in this hardwood forest, and I'm assuming you are, I'm assuming it's not shelterwood. The interval, the cutting cycle, can really be between 10 and 20 years. And what happens is, of course, if it's after 10 years, you will have a lower volume being retained. The forest can only grow, being harvested. The forest will only grow so fast. But so that harvest interval is really a product of the logger's ability to harvest a minimum volume per hectare. Of course, if access is going to determine that. So if you have great access and really high quality material, they might come back every 20 years and cut 20 cubic meters. But if it is lower quality material, the access is poor, they may not want to come back until they can cut at least 40 cubic meters. So it's going to be a product of the quality, the access, and the logger's desire in terms of minimum volume per hectare. So that cutting cycle, probably in that range of 10 to 20, depending on a number of those different factors.
So there's a follow-up on the telephone poles. How much are they worth each? Say a 10-inch diameter, 50 feet tall.
Well, 10-inch diameter is fairly small pole. You know, I'm not a pole buyer. I do know that that a big pole that it will be about a cubic meter. So a large diameter pole is going to be worth somewhere in that, you know, $120 to $150 a pole on the landing. So one pole, $150 basically. Those large diameter trees are close to a cubic meter. So, you know, a little under that, 120, somewhere in that range, 130, a pole or a tree.
So is it okay to have the certifier also be the harvester of your woodlot? Any cautions here?
I don't think so. This is the certifier in terms of the MIF-TIP plan. Is that
Or it might be the tree marker, maybe, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's there is a bit. There is a concern about the fox in the hen house when the person, you know, has a conflict of interest, right? So if you are the person deciding which trees are cut, and you're also the person harvesting, there is a potential conflict of interest. And that's not to say that that will always be the case, but just a little bit of a caution to be very, very careful and make sure that the right decisions are being made. And I'm not to say that that can't be done, because it can be done, because there's many, many reputable harvesters, and they're the, you know, they're the key to getting it done properly. But make no mistake, there is a conflict of interest that is there. It doesn't mean it can't be overcome by good quality marking and good ethics and good standards.
Right on. Thanks, Al. Still a few more here. We'll keep going. We if you get to the point where you have to rush off to your hockey game or anything like that, Al, let us know. And
I'm okay.
I can try to record a lot of these and we can follow up afterwards. But how close to the ground should you cut trees? Should you do any burning of brush after harvest?
Closer, the better. But of course, you know, you've got to balance that with you don't want to ruin your chainsaw, and a feller buncher is not going to ruin their cutting blade, that's for sure. So you know, you should never be certainly more than 25 centimeters, but as low as you can possibly get without damaging equipment. That's good. I am not a big fan of burning brush after harvest. I would like to see that material slash distributed evenly on the forest floor, and maybe locked so it's all within 2 feet of the forest floor. And it won't be long before the snow gets that down on the ground, because we want that for this, you know, potential nutrient that can come from it, and habitat and down wood. So I'm not a big fan of burning slash.
What do you do with the trees after thinning? Leave them on the forest floor? That kind of follows up from the previous question.
Yeah, just make sure that you're not leaving what I would describe as a jackpot. So have things locked so that they're close to the forest floor, so that the weight of the snow will press them down and get them on the forest floor where they'll start to decay and provide habitat.
When is clear cutting warranted? Example, junk trees growing on former pasture.
Clear cutting is warranted when you are managing intolerant species. So species that require a lot of sunlight. So silviculturally, poplar, white birch, black spruce, jack pine. These are all catastrophe-oriented species that need full sunlight to regenerate and maintain themselves. So silviculturally, that's when it's warranted. If you have a forest that you know is a bunch of hawthorn or things like that, a lot of shrubs like that, of course, remove those and you're starting an afforestation project over. So absolutely makes sense in those particular scenarios to start over and dial it back.
Right on. Are there specific paint colors for cutting saving trees when you're marking them?
Yeah, typically blue means retain. So anything that's marked blue should be retained. Red is typically a boundary line. And for removal, it's either yellow or a blaze orange. Either one of those are used to indicate trees that should be removed. And normally a tree marker will mark the stump of the tree. And that's so you can do a post-harvest audit. So if you're marking blue, for example, and you come to a tree and you see a blue mark on the stump of that tree, there's a problem. Someone has cut a tree that was not designated for removal. Conversely, if you're marking blaze orange for trees to be removed, and you see some trees that have been cut that don't have that mark on it, then that's a problem.
Right on. Well, thanks, Al. Someone just asked a question. I'll really answer it quickly. How does the OWA determine and vet Forest Service providers that we list in our Forest Services directory? Well, it's a matter of most, if not all of them, are members. They want what's best. We generally, know through trial and error and word of mouth who does a good job and sometimes who doesn't. But most who join the OWA, if not all, want to do a good job. And we have a really strong network, and the information flows, and people know who they want to get or who they should get. So it's a kind of an in-house thing, more or less, but it seems to work very well. Do you know what species were harvested in the Robertson case study?
I don't know in particular. I believe it was a tolerant hardwood forest. So we're looking at sugar maple, red oak, that kind of thing, but I don't know the exact species breakdown. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Matt, you can just flip an email to Paul about that. Matt DeMello is on our communications committee, so that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and further to that, sourcing reputable people as well. I contact probably the chair of your local OWA chapter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I know if people were to contact John Stewart or Tony Bull, they've had a lot of experience with a lot of folks in the Renfrew County chapter and aren't going to steer you wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point, Al. Thanks.
Yeah, and I want to get back to the question. I've been thinking a little bit about this, and I probably sounded a little hard-nosed on the can the harvester be the person selecting the trees? And the answer, of course, is yes. And that happens a lot, and it's done well and done very well in most cases. As long as they're both certified, as long as they both follow their code of ethics. It's when the person making that choice is not a certified silvicultural tree marker and is potentially high grading your forest, that's when it becomes a problem. So not to say that it can't be done, it can be done, is done many times successfully in Ontario, because the people in both of those situations, selecting trees and harvesting, are following their code of ethics and doing good sustainable management and are certified.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Al. We're getting down to the last bunch here. So how close should a mill be to where the trees are harvested? It can vary a bit.
The closer, the better.
Yeah.
I mean, but hey, we've all seen wood go hours and hours and hours. Some people are trucking red pine for 3 hours, 4 hours one way. You and I have seen, 4 to 5 hours. It's crazy sometimes how much wood is being transferred, but it reduces the economic viability of that operation. Transportation of wood is one of the highest elements of delivered wood cost in Ontario.
Right on. Just from Neil Craig here, just want to concur with the premise of importance of proper tree marking. I have a woodlot that is being thinned right now for the 4th time in 50 years, and it's yielding a significant volume of veneer and saw logs. Thanks for that, Neil.
Well done. Thank you, Neil. it's not just me spouting the smoke here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that can attest to this. And sadly, and I have to say this, sadly, on so much private land in Ontario, I am not seeing sustainable management done. Crown land, it's there, and it's required by law. And private land, I see way too much private land being high graded, diameter limit cut. The landowner is losing, and there's many times they're not even paid adequately for the high grade that is done. So they're getting beat there, but they're destroying all future opportunities. And Tony and Bull and John Stewart have told me many times about how many potential landowners in their chapter, Renfrew County, could be OWA members and are not. Yeah. And again, managed forest taxation rebate, how much land is not being managed under that regime. And it's frightening. It really is, because it's so much lost opportunity for landowners.
Al, you still good for a few more? I know it's getting late here, but
yeah, as long as I get out of here by 2, I can make my hockey game.
Okay, I think we'll probably be another 10 minutes or so. It's just such good questions and good discussion. People really appreciate it. From Jack, Al, your presentation sells the value of proper management and harvest very well. But how do we use this to get the attention of woodlot owners who just want to leave it alone or are hesitant to trust others to properly plan and harvest their property? Topic for another webinar.
Yeah, it is. And you make a good point, is that yes, it's terrible when people high grade and do diameter limits and don't manage sustainably, but it's also not a great practice when they do nothing in many situations, you know, depending on the condition of your forest, of course. But as we demonstrated in Parkside Gully and in PSP 1 and 2, that from an environmental perspective, it's also not great to leave all of your forest in an unmanaged condition, because eventually it will become a source of carbon. Mortality will exceed growth. How do we do it? We count on folks like the OWA to spread the message and spread the word, and those members. I mean, if I had a magic wand, we would have legislation tomorrow that would probably be deemed hard-handed, and but in Scandinavia, you have to manage your land. The government has actually a big say on what you do on private land, and I know there is no appetite for that here in Canada and in Ontario. And I've seen the signs, back off government, this is my land. I understand that, but in many jurisdictions in Europe, especially Northern Europe, you don't have a choice. You have to manage your private land forest estate sustainably for the greater good of all. And short of doing that, which will never happen, we are going to depend on folks like John and the OWA to pass on the message and lobby politicians for more incentives, make it even more attractive for landowners to manage sustainably. One of the problems with the managed forest taxation rebate is farmers can get the rebate for their farmland, and forested farmland that is not properly managed can still get that farmland rebate. And so there's some policy things we could do in Ontario that could help us out as well.
Just an answer from Paul Robertson. Robertson harvest 80% of the species with sugar maple, black oak, red oak, big nut hickory, black walnut, and Freeman maple. The reason the firewood volume is so large in 2021 is because 90% of it includes the saw log grounds. So there you go. That answers Matt's question. Just a comment from Ashik at MNDM and RF. As a good practice to hire a tree marker logger, ask them for at least 1 to 2 references their previous clients to ensure their work quality and ethics. Thanks, Ashik.
Good point.
Stuff. Yeah, just a couple more here, Al. Are you recommending extra cutting of ash trees to combat the emerald ash borer, or to simply cut the dead and dying ones? I'm thinking about the mistake made with regards to American chestnuts in the early 20th century, in which they cut all the trees and we lost some that might have been genetically resistant to the fungus.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one with the ash, and it's the same with beech bark disease. And basically, my approach and what we we teach on the silvicultural tree marking training program is that it's not a defect until the exterior defect indicator is there. So beech bark disease is not considered a defect just because the scale is there. We wait for the fruiting body to appear. All ash are not considered unacceptable growing stock unless they have evidence of the emerald ash borer, the D-shaped exit holes. So that's the approach that we teach on the silvicultural tree marking training program, i.e. give them a chance until we see evidence of the defect indicator on the exterior of the tree. There are different approaches, though, all across Ontario, and I'm not here to suggest one is wrong and the other is right. I'm just relaying the approach that we teach on the tree marking training program.
Yeah, right on. Just a few more here then, Al. From CAP, the thinned and unthinned plantation study that showed loss of timber volume, release of carbon, the unmanaged stand. Have there been other studies that compared biodiversity and other non-timber values? Example, the wood that was lost to rotting away and the unmanaged stand contributing to good humus layer, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, are there some long-term studies that look at nutrients in the soil from forest material? Yes. Generally speaking, most of the nutrients come from leaf litter and needle layer and not the coarse and fine wood. The coarse and fine wood is certainly there for habitat. I'm no expert in any of this, to be as anyone who knows me knows. But certainly there are other studies that have looked at the impacts on soil nutrients. Again, at the Petawawa Research Forest, there is some studies long-term that Trevor Jones is doing at the Petawawa Research Forest, looking at that very thing. Long-term nutrients, long-term down wood, coarse wood. Jeff Farah is also part of that study. And in this study, we did look at the downed wood. How much downed wood is enough downed wood? That's a question that is still out there. I believe policymakers in various jurisdictions, some of them are coming up with numbers. For example, we need to maintain a minimum of 30 cubic meters per hectare of downed wood. I've heard that number bandied about. Boy, there's a lot of studies are looking at those very things. Many of them are early days, and some of it is being reflected in policy for leaving a certain amount of downed wood on the forest. Certainly, and when it comes to standing material, in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest, we maintain 10 cavity trees or potential cavity trees per hectare. So future snags, we maintain solitary conifer, those kinds of things. So we know those elements are important. We have standards for some of them, and others are in development based on research.
Right. Okay, is there a preference over feller buncher or horse logging?
Is there a preference? You know, it's funny, we did the logging damage study we did actually compared conventional cut and skid to feller buncher, and we thought we would find a big difference in that blind study, and the feller buncher did no more damage than the cut and skid logging approach. So I can tell you there isn't a big difference between those two. Between horse logging and a skidder, yeah, I believe horse logging has the potential to do less damage, but I have seen some amazing work done by folks with skidders. There's some really talented loggers there who can also do a great. That depends, and it depends on the skill of the logger, both horse logger and skid operator, because horse loggers, if they're not careful, they can do a lot of damage as well. Right
on. All right, just one last comment here from Kat. Regulating private woodlot management has been left with municipalities by bylaws, which can choose not to have a bylaw at all, and most don't have forestry literate staff to admin if they have one. So just a point there she made. Yeah, that's a good point. Many do not have a bylaw. Those that do, some it's just a diameter limit bylaw.
but some do have a comprehensive bylaw that requires a trained silvicultural tree marker to make those choices. So the bylaw tool can be helpful if it's implemented and monitored the right way.
Right on. Well, thanks, Al. Thanks for answering all those questions. There were a lot of comments too about how great and excellent this presentation is and the discussion. So just say thank you. Really, really insightful and interesting. I put our sponsors up again, and Dorothy, thanks for providing that slide, and thanks to our sponsors. Yeah, just a great session. I'll try to follow up with everybody. I took some notes, and everyone's got my email if you want to further follow up and that sort of thing. If you want to join the Ontario Woodlot Association, you're not a member, we can set you up too. It's an incredibly good value, and we thank you for considering that. I know, Dorothy, did you have any final words you wanted to say? I certainly want to give you, as the main organizer and catalyst of this great series of weekly webinars, the last word here.
Just want to thank Al. Is interesting and informative as usual. I enjoyed it immensely, and just to let you know that we've got a little gift for you. It's a book called Around the World in 80 Trees, and hopefully we'll get it out to you shortly.
Perfect. Yeah, I just shared the graphic you sent, Dorothy. That looks like a great book. Al, can I borrow it from you when you're finished?
Absolutely, John. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Dorothy and John. And I really appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, you know, I'm speaking, these are my opinions. You know, I'm not really representing any organization. I guess that's a bit of a disclaimer, but they're the opinions of a retired guy who's I'm still passionate about the forest, and I think we can do some really good things out there together.
Yeah, well, we're just getting piles of kudos here, Al. Great presentation, really helpful to helping us to improve our forests. So well done. Thanks again, and have fun at hockey today. For folks tuning in next Wednesday, we got another great presentation. You can register online on the OWA website. It's well, it's a good one from I think Forest Genetics Association of Ontario, right, Dorothy?
Yes, it is. Yep.
So you can read all about that. I think we've already got well over 200 people registered, 250. So we'll see you next week. And again, thank you, Al, and look forward to seeing you soon.
You bet. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.